But I'm really excited to introduce Matt Fenwick, who is our guest for today. Matt's a good friend of ours, and I'm sure a lot of you here as well. Matt is the strategy lead at True North Content, and he has over 20 years experience spanning various disciplines like brand, comms strategy, and UX. So wherever there are any kind of messy content problems, Matt and the team will give it a shot. So Matt's going to be talking today about his work with Brand Canberra, but over the years, True North have worked with many different government departments and peak bodies, and they've done work like rewriting every government travel advisory for every country in the world, up to pinpointing what makes actuaries interesting. Maybe if Matt gets time, he can tell us about that once he's talked about Canberra. But yeah, we're here to talk about a project that Matt worked on in Canberra, which is his hometown, and it's all about telling the story of Canberra. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Matt, and I'll unshare my screen. And did I ever share? No, I didn't. I don't need to unshare anything because I never shared. Okay, Matt, over to you.
Cool. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, you can.
Yes.
Lovely to be with you, and a massive thank you to Angus and McGee and Emma for having me. I go way back with the Weave crowd, who've done several of their excellent courses. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge country. So I'm coming to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and this is a view of Ngunnawal country. You're looking at Mount Majura here, and sort of going on into that might be sort of Woden in the background. So I've been in Canberra about 17 years, and so many of my best experiences of my life have happened here. So in acknowledging country, there's a deep expression of gratitude to the place, and my experience of what I love about the city is just, it's impossible to separate from the landscape. Like, to me, it's some of the most beautiful country of anywhere in the world. And yes, I have traveled. So I want to pay my respects to the custodians of Ngunnawal country, pay my respect to elders past, present, emerging. I want to acknowledge the elders of all of the lands that we are on in Australia and abroad. Massive welcome to any Indigenous people who may be here with us today. So this is also Ngunnawal country. And, just this short clip, you get a sense of the space and the place and the things that people who live in Canberra love about it. But if I just go back, like, there's always that gap between what we love about a place or where we work or the people that we're with and how others see us. So this is a cartoon from First Dog on the Moon. It says, people from Canberra say not everyone who lives there is a public servant, but nobody outside Canberra believes them or cares. Canberra's mascot is a retrenched public servant rehired as a consultant in the same job. So that is an outside view of Canberra. It's by no means the only view, but it is one that people outside say about us. And it's also one that some Canberrans themselves have taken on board. We call it the Canberra cringe. So why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem if you want to attract people to Canberra, to work, to invest, to study, to visit. And if we don't have a compelling account of what makes Canberra special, something to counter this sense that we're just about politicians and roundabouts, we're always going to be coming from behind. So there has been this problem for a while, acknowledged within Canberra, that we need to do better at expressing our value. How do we do that? Well, this is one solution. This is from one of University of Canberra's web pages. Why live in Canberra? We're home to the nation's highest employment rate, highest average salary, some of its best infrastructure and services. Our community has a national reputation for being welcoming, friendly, accepting of other cultures, and our low crime rate allows for a permanent feeling of safety and security. Now, I know from having done research into why students come to Canberra, all of those things are true and they are useful. But does that actually change anything? Telling people this stuff. Here's another approach. This was from the Canberra Brand Project. I think it was like 2016, 2017 or so. And this was done by a creative agency in Canberra. And so they came up with the logo here, which personally I think is pretty cool. And the slogan was confident, bold, ready, mapping to CBR. Now, again, all of those things, you can demonstrate to be true, but are they really, really true? And are they uniquely true of us? You could look at another city like Wellington, New Zealand, that we often get compared to, kia ora to my New Zealand friends, where they could say exactly the same thing. So there's nothing there that's really sort of unique to us. And there's also a sense of like, it's kind of what we want to be true. There's kind of a sense of us possibly trying a bit too hard. So that's the scene setting. This is the project that we were engaged to do. So number one, to create a story brand for the city of Canberra. Number two, to explore ways of bringing that story to life. And in number three, to do it for working, studying, visiting Canberra, and for our city as a whole. So, seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, before I dive into the how we did it and some of the lessons for story branding in other contexts, I might just actually cover why story, why this approach. So, a couple of things. Conventional communications will engage the mind first. So remember that University of Canberra example where it told you a bunch of facts. And we know that stories are much better at engaging people on an emotional level. And there's a lot of research, scientific research around just how persuasive stories can be. One of the interesting things that we tend to think that we are more rational in our decision making than we actually are. Again, the research shows that we tend to make decisions on an emotional or instinctual level first, and then come in later to retrofit a rational justification for it. So a lot of conventional comms is all about teaching people propositional truth. If anybody wants to really geek out on this, I'll share the details for one of my intellectual heroes, John Vervaeke, who talks about all the different levels of knowing. We'll come back to that a bit in a second. So conventional comms, what we want others to believe about us. That confident, bold, ready is sort of the kind of thing that you would arrive at from a lot of workshops, a lot of stakeholder engagement, but it is, we want people to believe this about us. Whereas a story-driven approach is the truth that we have earned because we can tie it back to where we began, what we set out to achieve, and we know it to be true. We own it in a level, it has an authenticity that's very, very difficult to get at through more surface level brand exercises. Conventional comms, lists and facts. Now, as a content designer with that hat on, I love me a good bulleted list. But if you're trying to engage people, engender a shift in perception or attitudes, bulleted lists aren't really that good at that. The other thing I'd say too that I see a lot in government communications, particularly where it's kind of comms dominant or comms driven, is that you'll get a lot of different things, a lot of different assets, but there's not really anything tying them together. There's no foundational idea or narrative that those things are kind of housed by and held together by. Finally, telling versus showing. There is this real tendency in brand and comms, and especially in government, to make declarative statements. I was reviewing some copy for a government agency earlier this morning where it said, X department is committed to blah. How many times have you seen the phrase such and such a department is committed to something? That's telling. Whereas if you were to have stories of what the department has actually done, however imperfectly, it's going to be so much more persuasive. So that's why story. And the intent was that by identifying the story of Canberra, we'd have kind of a rallying cry, something that would engage first the hearts and minds of the citizens of Canberra, so that they could share and then express in a way that was authentic and unique for them. Can I just check, is this making sense so far? Can I get a thumbs up or a meh? And I can't see comments, so Angus McGee, please call out if there's any thoughts. All right. What do I mean by story? Um, so this may sound obvious, but there's a lot of stuff that I see that's called story that, in my opinion, isn't. So a story is people we care about moving through time to reach a destination. This is my definition. There's plenty of others. I'm not saying my one's the one true path, but it's just something that we can explore a bit. So first thing, people we care about. So this to be a story must center on people as people. Most government media releases are not stories. They may feature a person as a source of a quote, but there is no sense of what actually happened for that person. A lot of, even if you go to a lot of government sort of more narratives, case studies, there might be a sense of chronological flow, but there's not really that much drama in it. There's not that much at stake. Must have movement and flow. So a linear sequence is not enough. There must be a sense of how the beginnings gave rise to the middle, gave rise to the end. There must be some sense of logic, like a narrative that flows through those things. It must have a purpose or an endpoint. So the person must be reaching for something. There must be some kind of a destination. That's not always going to be a complete resolution, happily ever after, but it must be reaching towards something. A lot of content that I see that's coming out, there's not really a goal or a value underlying it. The other thing, this is a frame. I love my frameworks. God help me. But this is a framework I came up with because story is kind of used in a lot of different contexts, and sometimes, and I was just talking to McGee and Angus just before this session about a client who came to them with a storytelling need. But I think it's helpful to kind of try and clarify the level that the need exists at. So you've got narrative, which is stories we tell about things that happen, and the discipline that's typically involved: journalism, history, content marketing. This is going to get you a discrete output that you may or may not choose to call as a story. Then we've got the experience, stories we design for others to play out. So service design, experience design, you could also talk about employee design, employee experience design. But so say in an educational context, you might do a journey map that would say, these are the steps that students go through when they enroll. And you can either have that as a current state story or a future state. And to me, that fits the criteria for a story. It's got people we care about, moving through time, they're reaching for a goal. And then stories we live. This is identity. And this is the level that the Canberra story was seeking to operate at. Here you've got brand identity, cultural change. I would say that you really need all three levels sorted for the storytelling to be effective. That doesn't mean that you always need to do a massive, deep brand identity piece, but you should have some sense of how this story up here ties into the organization's lived values and culture. And that's not just going to be the thing that they put in their cultural blueprint. It's like, how do they actually live that out? And if we're going to be doing even say a content marketing play, we need some sense of how those things are connected together through a customer journey. Otherwise, you are just going to be throwing SHIT at the wall. All right, our approach. How did we do this thing? How on earth? So first thing I'd say is that we had some inspiration. So a client, Brody, was inspired by the work that brand Tasmania had done. So a lot of the hallmarks of our approach, what we delivered, how we went about it, was very much inspired by what they did. And Tasmania, they had some beautiful stuff there. Being Tasmanian is a quiet pursuit of the extraordinary was like the foundational brand concept that a lot of their other stuff came off from. So number one, For us, a story is not created, it's discovered. So the confident, bold, ready example, that was a typical output of a creative process where you're relying upon the genius of someone to just like imagine the future, and they give it to you, and then you are amazed by their creativity. And so we didn't want to do that. We wanted to approach it much more from a perspective of listening and curating. And obviously there's creativity in deciding what you listen to, what gets curated, but it needed to feel like something that already existed, and our job was to bring it to light, because that means that you can anchor it into in much more authenticity. So I led a team of 5 interviewers. They were all journalists or creative writers. We did 65 interviews, half an hour to an hour long. There was a quantitative survey that was there, not to validate the story, but to kind of identify which elements of it would resonate in what situations. We also did a lot of kind of secondary source research, so reading histories of Canberra, because then you can tap into like what Robert Menzies said about it, how much he hated the gutters. So that was the approach that we went through. And there was a lot of distillation, many, many drafts. I might call this out here because I'm conscious that folks will be coming here from different disciplines. So how brand interviews are different. So UX interviews, I should say, I've done all of these different types of interviews. So this is just my take. UX interviews, you're often very focused on needs and behavior, how people are interacting with an interface or a product. Angus, what would you expect to see when you clicked on this? Did that make sense to you? Where do you think you might go next? Those kind of questions. Journalistic interviews, that was probably my first trade. I'm kind of old, so I've done a lot of different things. But when you're doing a journalistic interview, looking for facts, perspectives, quotes, and I've been doing those interviews where you'd be going, aha, they said something that I can use. So I can pop in the story, and that's going to appear in the first paragraph or two. Brand interviews, you're looking for moments of truth. So you may never get an actual quote that you can use, but you're looking for something that feels like it's a bit of a, you know it when you see it, but it's something that feels resonant, and it feels like it's true both for that person and also taps into some kind of deeper truth that you can dip into and leverage. And so, real life example, one of the people that I interviewed when we were working on the Canberra story, this person, she was an international student. So she came from a country and a family environment where her identity was very much kind of boxed in and given to her. There was a very strong sense of like, this is what you as a woman who has this particular identity can and should be. And then she came to Canberra to study. She joined a gym. She said, I came to Canberra and I got strong. Now, I've read this like many, many times, and even now reading that, I get shivers. So that tells me that that says something that is true enough for us to build the broader story from. Next up, story leads structure. There's this real tendency in all disciplines, to be honest, to try and take the research and sort of smush it into a pre-existing structure. And story branding is no different. What we tried to do was take more of a bottom-up approach where, and I know from having heard McGee and Angus talk about their sort of discovery to refine process, like for them, it's kind of similar. It's sort of bottom up. Like, what is a way of making sense of what we're hearing? And you often have some kind of pre-existing structure, but you adapt. And so this is part of the deliverable for the Canberra story. So this is one of the values. We had 4 values: interested, balanced, nurturing, and I think interested and balanced, nurturing, purposeful. Yeah. So we had these four values. And a typical brand exercise would go, great, here's your four values. But we just had a sense that because Canberra has so much privilege that if we just talked about our values, the whole thing would be a bit smug. So in addition, we came up with these four or three gifts. These are the things that make it possible for Canberra as a community to be like this: abundance, space, and closeness. Another aspect where we had to play with the structure a bit was actually thinking about the story archetype that we wanted to fit to. So if any of you folks have sort of studied, story theory, then you'll know that there's often like seven basic plots. The idea is that every story fits these plots. And interestingly, when we spoke to the brand Tasmania people to get their perspective, they're like, aha, Canberra's a comedy. Haha, see how quirky it is. And we're like, no, F off. Um, Talking about the story as a comedy, i.e., the butt of a joke, wasn't going to serve us. So we had to sort of listen and go, what is a structure that feels both true and more useful? And in the end, we came up with the rebirth narrative. But the takeaway here is, yes, have a structure, but be prepared to bend and flex the structure. There's a saying, one of my army buddies told me that if the map doesn't fit the ground, then the map is wrong. You know? Next up, make it useful. And having looked at a lot of brand artifacts, and I know some of you folks will have seen this before in your travels, they're often, well, sometimes often very, very beautiful and have beautiful words, but you are left with like being completely at sea about what do I actually do with this thing? And for me, as someone who has worked in both brand and human-centered design, this was super, super important. I was talking a lot to my client about the context of use. What is the thing we're going to give you, and then how are people going to use it? And so if you go back to part of the deliverables, you'll see here we've got the value, we've got the paragraph that fleshes it out, and we have the quote. So that shows that gives this authenticity, believability. It's also something that can be used in different contexts. And you've got like four sort of hooks. What does interested actually mean? Because we shouldn't expect people to be able to look at the thing that we've spent all this time collaborating on and poring over and be able to make sense of it. And we did a bit of a guide, for you in your, this is actually for tourism operators, for you in your business, what are some prompts that you can use to tell the story of your business? Next up, have a great client. And I'm just going to check to see if
I think
Brady on the line.
Brody's here, I think.
Hey,
I am.
Brady. Glad you
Hi,
made
Matt.
it.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, when did you join, Brady?
From the very beginning.
Oh, I didn't see it. Anyway, so Brody was our client for all of this work. And I think this is partly to make Brady feel good so that she'll buy me lunch next time. But I have had other projects that have gone south, and there can be a real tendency to sort of kind of blame the service provider. But we always need to ask, like, how much license did the service provider have to do great work? Were they given appropriate, timeframes, access to all of the people? And in this case, we had so much license and then some. And particularly because, there was a sense of sort of feeling our way in the dark, particularly with the first, actually, all the stories kind of went through that phase. And that's a necessary point. If any of you have ever seen the design squiggle, where there needs to be that sense of sort of exploration of ideation, but actually having permission to do that. So the trust that Brody showed in the process and in us as a team, like that's what made it possible for us to get to something great. The first iteration certainly wasn't it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Impact, the difference that the story made. So, it's fine to go, yeah, great. You did a story and people felt good about it. This is one of the questions I asked Brody. So, a couple of things. Attracting a new workforce to the capital. So, With the workforce story that kind of sat under the master story, we were able to provide kind of scripts or points to employers that they could show to prospective employees, to say, this is what's great about living in Canberra. What we hear again and again is that once people are here, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. This place is amazing. We also, this is the content marketing side, I think trialed possibly the first use of influencers in an ACT government campaign, or certainly very, very early, and got ridiculous number of impressions there. The next one was drawing in university students. And so we've done like a study story. And what was really, really cool was to see ANU sort of pick up the framework that we had created and to actually use that to ground their campaigns. So when you see adoption, like that's one of the key things that Brady and I look for, are other people picking this up and using it. Drawing in visitors, similarly, it's been used to brief content creators and creatives, and planning an entire festival. This is the Uncharted Festival last year, and the the point of the values and the gifts is not just to have like, these are the things that we say, but these are the things that we want to hold on to or nurture or stay true to. So how do we design and plan a festival that kind of nurtures the type of place that we want to be and the type of experiences that we want to give people? So I think that kind of stuff, where you're getting below the narrative layer and actually getting into the, what experiences does you design, what kind of identity do you create? That says to me that it's hopefully working. I might actually read you the story. I was like, I got almost the end of prepping the prezzo. Brady, do you want to read it or do you want me to?
No, you should.
Okay, all right. And I was like, I guess I should probably have the story. Now, I should note that this was in the context of a deliverable with a lot of moving parts to help people kind of use it and interpret it. But anyway, he goes, for thousands, hang on, I'm actually going to pull it up on my screen and get to it. Bear with me. Bear with me. Yes, 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 yes. Yes. The suspense is killing you. All right. For thousands of years, the Ngunnawal have hosted guests from other nations and shared the gifts of this region. Then, when Australia came together in federation, we needed a capital. And this place of limestone plains was chosen. They named us Canberra. It was a chance to design a new kind of city. The hope was that our capital would reflect the best of what Australia could be. We were imagined as a place of flowing water, conversations unfolding along tree-lined avenues. But compromise is never easy. Our first residents saw us as sterile, concrete. When a city's business is government and administration, it can feel all function and process. A place where politics happens and not much else. People came here reluctantly, just to get ahead in their careers, preparing to leave even before they arrived. Yet the spirit of this place worked on them. Where some saw barren space, others saw room to create, to plant something and watch it grow. Many of us came from somewhere else, which fostered a distinct sense of community. You see that in the way we look out for each other, in the sporting teams we love, the causes we back, and the work that needs to be done. With layers of commitment, Canberra came to life. We became a city worth staying for. This place of arcing roads and autumn trees became home. Living here means having space to draw breath. We choose the tempo of our lives. We throw ourselves into our work and we celebrate when it's done. We look out our windows and see big blue skies and the snow-capped brindabellas. Kids swim in rivers and hear the calls of cockatoos and rosellas. There is room to roam and explore. We succeed in Canberra by collaborating, by believing there's room for everyone, for new people and new ideas. It's why businesses are sprouting almost every hour. Baristas, curators and eco-warriors, tradies, engineers and artists. We look outward and forward. We ask the big questions with the optimism that we'll uncover the answers. We love exploring, but we also love knowing we're home when we catch sight of Black Mountain's tower. Don't expect us to be like other cities. We were always intended to be a different place. We're ready to welcome you whenever you come around.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Pause for effect. We're not done. A few more things. All right. I'm conscious that the title of this talk was implications for government. You could also apply this to large corporate organizations as well. Number one, tell actual stories. We've seen that a lot of what gets kind of published doesn't meet the criteria for compelling and effective stories. There will be some formats that in our role in comms and content design, there's some stuff that we are just expected to create. But so this is a yes and, like, where else can we create more authentic stories? Look for the connective tissue. So very often I see, media releases, stories being created that don't have any, there's no thought to where they fit into the customer journey. So where else might people like to go next? And if you're thinking about managing a large volume of assets, what is the kind of the curating layer that sits on top of that? That may be a tag-based taxonomy, but there might be other opportunities to weave something together in ways that are a little bit more accessible. And then ground the perspective. There is this huge opportunity to express a message through the eyes and experiences of actual people. So we did some work for the National Emergency Management Agency doing disaster relief and recovery. They have so many compelling stories that they can tell, not just from a program policy perspective, but from actual people on the ground doing the work. About True North, I should tell you a bit about us. So we, there can be a bit of a divide and a bit of a fight between brand and human-centered design. From my perspective, it's all the same thing. It's all about delivering value to people through experiences, and it's just different tools. So we have done some work in the brand storytelling space. We've also done a ton of human-centered design projects. For example, Australian Federal Police, for this one, we did digital strategy, user research, information architecture, content strategy, and we won the Australian Web Industry Award for Best Overall Content in 2024. That one had a storytelling angle because it was like, they're really keen to recruit more people. So it's like, how do you actually surface stories of the people who serve? This is what we do: strategy and research, content design, training and capability development. If you need help in any of those things, please reach out to us. These are details, and Sandra from True North is on the call as well. Hello. But yeah, feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn, and thank you again for listening. At this point, I'll stop sharing and open it up for any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Matt. Brodie, I suspect people might have questions for you as well. Would you be happy to take questions if people want to ask them?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best.
Wonderful. But yeah, Matt, I'll start with one. If I'll just mention one of the things that really resonated with people is when you talked about earning the truth that we've earned, and that idea of being earned. I think was something that that really resonated with people, and I know I wrote that down. When you said it, I wrote down the word earned as well. So yeah, love that. One thing I particularly appreciated was the parts of the talk where you sort of say, well, this is how this type of work is different from other types of work that we do. So the pyramid where you talk about the three different sort of levels of storytelling, I thought that was incredibly helpful. And also the different types of interviews that you might, or the different things that you're trying to get out of interviews. I'm wondering if, and you sort of touched on this at the end, is there anything that you learned from this project or anything you discovered in this project that might change the way that you do the more UX focused projects in the future? Any sort of techniques or just ways of thinking that you think are really useful to bring back to that UX work?
That's a really good question. I want to say, like in talking about different techniques, it's not that one is better, worse than the other.
Mm,
It's kind of choosing the right tool. I would say that UX in general, and this is partly due to kind of its antecedents and disciplines, it often doesn't do emotion particularly
mm,
well. It's sometimes talk about like pain points,
mm.
and certainly like level of frustration with an experience or a service, but to actually think about like what is the think more richly about the emotions that people are going to have, and also that it's again there's a disciplinary division where content designers will typically get to work on like plain Englishing stuff or interface copy, and then the more storytelling stuff is done by different
Mm.
discipline, but like where are the opportunities to draw those people in and collaborate with them? Um, let's see other techniques. I think also just like it's been a real and a work in progress for me, like the context of use, like trying to make our deliverables useful. And I love going deep, going long, with the deliverables, but like how do you create those hooks that make it useful? Um, yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks, Matt. Anyone like to ask Matt a question or Brody?
I have a question that's kind of an extension on what you were saying, because I think maybe it's like a comment, and Matt, you'll know where to take this. But I feel like we're very kind of hardcore content design focused, right? Which is like, it is all about the task and it is all about the user need. And something I found as I was like listening to your talk was just finding myself like appreciating and I think there can be a culture a little bit in content design of being like, oh, that's comms stuff, and comms stuff isn't useful, or it isn't, it's, but like listening to your story, I was really moved by like the stories that you were telling and the way that you came to those stories. And I did, I guess, find myself kind of wondering like how you, I mean, because sometimes with the things about stories is they become very point in time, right? So like tasks and content design is like this enduring thing that's like always there. But then these kind of storytelling things are like moment in time things, and you create a campaign website and you kind of tell stories.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just wondering, yeah, again, like what if you have any kind of take on how to bring those two, which is it's an extension of what Angus is saying too, I think, but like how to bring those things together more, maybe. Yeah, and any ways you've seen that done well, maybe.
Hmm. Um, Brady, do you have any thoughts on that one? Like, I think it's around because we've worked a lot on the canberra.com.au site, and that's kind of had to balance the sort of the tasks, the things where people come for
Yeah,
a
yeah.
particular
I'm
thing.
very interested to know about that, how those two things like live together, I guess,
Yeah.
in a kind of real world way. Yeah.
How the values and the actual outputs come together.
Yeah, like how the kind of storytelling, like, so, talking about things like the moments of truth and even the values, like one of the slides you showed was around the qualities of Canberra. I think you mentioned like the gifts, the
Yeah.
abundance, the things, and
Cool.
like all that stuff, that's really beautiful stuff. And I just wonder if you ever find that you're able to bring that into the kind of functional aspects of content, not just the storytelling kind of parts of content.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story that Matt read there at the end, its role in all of this was really just to be a vehicle to carry the values, to be something that people could remember a bit easier than the values. It's very easy for us to stand up in front of a room and say, here's Canberra's values, and they walk out of the room and they've forgotten them, but they hear that story, they will find a part in it that feels right for them and for the work that they have to do for Canberra, because we're very mindful that we are not the only ones promoting Canberra. It is the role of lots of different organisations and humans. And so what could we do that helped some of that stuff land, and that when they came to a moment where they did have to write a web page for the University of Canberra about what it's like to live here, that they have a place to start from, and that we weren't all trying to start that task every single time we came to the task of describing Canberra. And so I think they come together very practically when it's the same organisation that gets to do the brand building and then actually deliver it. But when it's really decentralised, like the work of a place brand, sometimes those lines drawn between brand and actual outputs, it is harder to see, but we're finding that it is, it's at least a place to start from, and the use cases for it are becoming more and more apparent as more and more people hear about it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brady.
You can kind of see, I think, in Tasmania, Tasmania being the example that sort of inspired you, that Tasmania, everybody does seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet, even though it might be difficult to trace the exact sort of lines of influence. Any business that you go to in Tasmania, any cafe you go, any restaurant you go to, any winery you go to, that they do seem to be kind of telling a consistent story.
Even though it's told in like 100 different voices, there's something about it that feels similar.
Yeah, and I think the measure of success for us is not everybody using the exact same words. I think often in brand you can get fixated on do people parrot back our tagline exactly, whereas we're about like does it align to the sort of emotional truth? So we're not trying to give people how to put a straitjacket, or dictate to them.
It's not like talking points.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Please pipe up at anyone who'd like to ask a question. So feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat. But I've got another one while we're waiting. I noticed the story, Matt, is very much about newcomers coming to Canberra. So people coming to Canberra to study or work or visit. Where do born and bred Canberrans, and I know as one yourself, you will have thought about this. Where do oh, you're not?
I'm an immigrant. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So obviously there are people in Canberra who have always lived in Canberra. What's their sort of place in the story, or how do you think about the balance between people who are born and bred versus coming in from elsewhere?
So in saying that the story is discovered, there is a strategic decision around which bits we listen to. And this isn't to say that other experiences are not important, but it's what do we need this thing to do, fundamentally. And if it's about kind of describing in a compelling way why Canberra has something to offer to the outside world, framing in terms of the immigrant experience matters. I think we also found that, like, even for people who were born and bred here, there was kind of a decision point where they decide to stay. And so in talking about, this may sound like I'm fudging, but in talking about truth, we're not necessarily kind of going like, is it empirically accurate for every single person? Yeah. Brady, do you have anything to add on that?
As a born and bred Canberran who, like many of them, felt like they needed to go somewhere else, which is maybe just the same as anyone who's lived in any town they want to try somewhere else and then returned. To Matt's point, there is a moment, even in the people who we interviewed who had lived in Canberra, who had maybe left briefly and returned, there was a moment where they committed to Canberra in a different way, where they were like, I'm now staying. And that was what we called the arrival point. And that might be the physical arrival for those people entering Canberra, but it's as much the arrival at your new story with Canberra, your new experience of it, that experience where you start to go, actually, there's value here for me and I'm seeing it in a new way. And that related to the rebirth arc that we found across lots of the different stories, was even if they had grown up in Canberra, had really strong community and friend and family networks, there was a moment where the place became a different prospect for them. Yeah.
Wow, what a lovely way to tie those different experiences together. Wonderful. All right. Oh, yes, we have Ruth. You have a question or a comment?
Yeah, first of all, a comment. That was really awesome. Thank you for that. I'm actually an experienced researcher and writer as well. And I've been doing a lot of trying to describe what I do recently. So when when you were saying all of that, I was just like, oh my goodness, that pyramid and everything's coming together. And I'm not a crazy person. There's other people out there like this. But I did have a question about the interviews. You did say that you use journalists and writers to do the interviews. I thought that was really interesting and just wondered, is that something you've done before? And yeah, how did you find that process?
So at Trilith, we tend to like people who are Swiss Army knives who can do like 18 different things. Isn't that right, Sandra? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah. However, if it was a pure human-centered design project, I would have used different people, because as I said, like the human-centered design or UX interviews are very focused on task completion, and there is a real art to knowing how to do that, how not to lead people, etc., etc. So choosing journalists and writers, it was people who had experience in writing stories, so they would know what to listen for, know to listen for the drama, and also just as much to know when to kind of go off script and sort of follow your nose a bit, which is something that journalists are kind of trained to do. So yeah, when I was like coaching the team, if I saw someone who was just going through the script, I'd be like, no. Like you need to probe a bit more, you know? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I assume as well did they then do the synthesizing of the findings as
Yeah,
well?
that was like very, very much a team effort. And indeed, like looking at the final draft, there are some bits that I definitely remember writing, but there are others where it could have come from anywhere. And so it's, I think, more about maintaining the coherence of the story, rather than it being the product of one mind, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for the question, Ruth. And yeah, thanks again, Matt, and thanks for Brody for being here as well. It's wonderful we don't normally get clients, get to hear from clients, and so often you'll hear, but often you'll go to these kind of case study presentations and people will talk about all the things that went right in the project, and it's kind of like, I really wish the client was here to. But yeah, it sounds like you two had an incredibly productive working relationship, and obviously the whole team. So yeah, really, really fascinating to hear about, Matt, and thank you so much for that presentation. I'm sure we're all going to think about Canberra in a different way after today. So I know I will, although I really enjoy my visits to Canberra. I would encourage anyone who hasn't been to Canberra, it's worth a visit for sure. So we've got about 5 minutes left for any announcements that people have. We have a few ourselves, but if you do have an announcement that you'd like to share with the group, feel free to pop it into the chat. So as we said at the beginning, it could be a job, a a course, an event, anything that you're running, or anything that you have to offer. It could be the fact that you're looking for work yourself. And yeah, just pop something into the chat. Our next meetup is going to be on the 26th of September at the same time, 12 noon Eastern time. We're really excited. We're going to be hearing from Keith Oak, who's an engineer, an AI engineer with the Queensland government, talking about ensuring content's integrity with AI. So he has a lot of interest in content as an engineer and how content can make AI better, and how to think about AI ethically as well. So he's going to be, I think, a really fantastic speaker, and a bit of a follow-up to the talk that we had from Deborah Carver a couple of months ago. So really looking forward to that one.
Oh, I was just going to chime in to say one of the things that I would say about what Keith will kind of add to the conversation, and one of the reasons why we brought him in is because he's a great reality checker on what can actually be done with AI. So I'm pretty sure we're all in organizations where there's a lot of noise about AI and what it can do, and a lot of executive interest in it. So if you want to come along and get a bit of a reality check on what's actually possible and what's kind of good practice as well, AI, or ask someone who actually understands AI, Keith will be the man for that. Yeah.
I remember Matt McGee. Yeah, McGee did an interview with Keith as part of a project she's working on. I just remember her just raving after this interview about how amazing his insights were. So yeah, that's definitely going to be one not to miss. And another one not to miss will be in October, where our friend Kate Thomas is going to be talking to us. Kate, a lot of you know Kate. She's just moved back to Australia after a few years overseas. Her most recent work was with PayPal, essentially helping them to implement a multi-country content management system. So she will have a lot of interesting stories to share about that and other things. We do have a YouTube channel where we're now putting our talks. So make sure you subscribe to that one. And we will be adding more past talks when we eventually get around to it, but we're definitely putting talks there as they happen. Some of you know, at Weave, we are the Australian trainers for Content Design London, and we have a couple of their courses coming up. Matt mentioned that he's done, I think, both of these courses, Matt. So there's the Content Design Fundamentals course, which used to be called Foundation in Content Design. They've changed the names, but it's the same course. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. And then Content Design in Action, which used to be called Advanced Content Design, is coming up on the 21st and 22nd of November. And that one's selling fast. So you can find all the details at our website. So I'll just mention a few things that have come up in the chat. Dan's looking for people who have experience with creating content for folks with PTSD. People who have some experience in that area. So please, check out Dan's message if you have any knowledge about that. Thanks for your comment, Karen, as well. And yes, people talking about some lessons from the session. That's a great. Thanks for that. Thanks for those comments. Ruth, who asked a question earlier, is new to Melbourne and looking for some work in strategy and innovation. Check out Ruth's website. I had a chat to Ruth the other day. She does really interesting work that, as she says, is kind of a little bit hard to describe, but a really interesting kind of intersection of various different disciplines. Yes, and as McGee mentioned, we're thinking about possibly something in person in November in Melbourne, for those of you who happen to be in Melbourne. Any other announcements before we let you all go? All right. Well, thanks so much for being here again. Always lovely to see everyone. Thanks again to Matt for his really amazing talk, and thanks also to Brodie for being here. And we will see you all in a month.
Awesome. Thanks, team. Great to see you all.
Thanks, Dan.